the word that I use always is unfulfilled. I felt really unfulfilled, and I really could not understand what more I could possibly do to feel satisfied, because on paper, I checked off all the boxes. So that was where my real kind of soul searching started, because I was like, I don't know, I'm 27 years old. Like, if I'm feeling this way now, if I just continue doing what I'm doing, how am I actually going to feel when I'm 50? Or I don't want to wait until I'm 50 and I retire so that I can start figuring out what I actually like to do to make myself happy.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. Are you craving a social life without the hangover? I'd encourage you to join Zero Proof. It's a lighthearted community diving into all things connection, lifestyle, and fun without the drinks. From wellness tips and product highlights to real life stories and every way to have a blast beyond the bar, Zero Proof has you covered. Be a part of the Zero Proof movement and take your social game up a notch. It's honestly one of my favorite newsletters. I'm going to put the link in the show notes for you all. Check it out. And if you enjoy it, tell them that Mile 40 sent you over. Again, check out Zero Proof. Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. I greatly appreciate it. I'm recording this right around Thanksgiving week. However, it'll be posted after Thanksgiving. But that being said, regardless, as we head into the holiday season, thank you all for your continued support. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, check out the show notes. Pick up a copy of Audacious or Break Barriers. There's a discount code in there. The ultimate stocking stuffer. Today's guest is a very special guest, and I am excited to dive in. Today, I have Nadia Hanut. She's a seeker, mentor, and student of the sacred, whose journey into the heart of self-love and purpose has been guided by ancient plants and traditions. Her path has been one of profound healing and transformation, a journey that has spanned over 6 years and ultimately inspired her to move to Ecuador to reconnect with her roots and dedicate her life to understanding and being in service to Mother Earth and the essence of life itself. She engages deeply with personal experiences and the wisdom of her teachers, exploring the vast terrains of the human, psycho-spiritual journey and healing arts. Through her commitment to learning and personal evolution, Nadia embodies the principles of stewardship for the planet and advocates for a life lived in harmony with oneself and the natural world. Nadia, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
I made it through 99% of the bio and then just tripped up on the last word. But no, listen, I'm really, really excited to have you here. Another guest referral is so incredible to see the evolution of one guest coming on and saying, hey, you need to speak to my friend. So you know Lana, whose episode did really well. And that's how you and I got connected. Tell me how the two of you even know each other.
So Lana and I have known each other since intermediate school, which is junior high. So maybe since we were like 14 or 15 years old.
Got it. So you guys grew up in Jersey, right?
We grew up in Jersey. Yeah. So it's been like 20 years, I guess, of knowing each other. So we've seen each other through so many different stages of life and evolution. And it's been so beautiful to grow alongside each other.
And she's in Colombia?
She's in between Miami and Colombia.
In between Miami and Colombia. Okay, so two of you grew up in Jersey. She went from Jersey to Miami/Colombia. You went from Jersey to Ecuador. And so I can see where the two paths might align there. Let's dig a little bit deeper, learn a little bit about you, learn a little bit about childhood, what it was like for you growing up, and let's navigate ourselves to where you are today. So start off by just telling us a little bit about childhood.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I grew up, so I'm half Egyptian, half Ecuadorian. My mom is Ecuadorian and my dad is Egyptian. And, I think ultimately both of my parents emigrated to the US to just be able to build the best life that they could for their family. And so I would say that they gave me everything that one could really hope to have as a child, in terms of education, extracurriculars, things like that. And then, in the home, it was really interesting because they both come from different cultures. Also, my mom is Roman Catholic, my dad is Muslim. And so the agreement was that the children would be raised Muslim. And so when I was young, there was a really big emphasis on me learning the religion, me learning the Arabic language. And for my dad, it was really important to preserve the traditions, the Egyptian traditions that he grew up with and the Muslim traditions that he grew up with. And my mom was really supportive of that. But that was really interesting for me, because I grew up in Monmouth County, New Jersey. It's like a predominantly like white, I think, like if anything, it's like Italian heritage, but super like white American culture, and it was really different than my culture at home. And so that was interesting to navigate. I think basic like human psychological evolution is like the first thing above all is like you seek security, and then like you seek like belonging and stuff like that, and seeking to be a part of the group. And so definitely being half Egyptian, half Ecuadorian, with the way in which, things were like the energy, the way that we did things in the house, like the language of my parents, all of that like always made me feel a little bit different, even though on the outside I was kind of doing the same thing as everyone else.
What was I'm guessing they spoke to you mostly in English growing up?
We spoke in English because my dad doesn't really speak Spanish and my mom doesn't really speak Arabic.
Wow. Okay. All right. And so take me back to like elementary school, right? Like and where people are at a young age starting to really identify with cultures. Did you I understand the decision that your parents had made with regards to how they wanted to raise you, but did you identify with either culture as a youngster? Someone asked you, what are you? What was your response? Like at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, did you say I'm half Ecuadorian, half Egyptian?
I don't think so, honestly. I feel like it was something that for me, I struggled with. Like I was saying before, I feel that I just wanted to be like everyone else. At that young age, there are two examples that always come to mind for me. My first is my name. Nadia, I never really had any issue with, but my middle name is Estefania. So you can really hear the like Latin roots of that. And then I always say this now, back then I remember thinking, at that time, Anne was a really popular middle name, right? So I had so many people that I knew, my classmates that were like Caitlin Ann or Melissa Ann or whatever it is. And I'm like Nadia Stefania. So it was like every year at the beginning of the school year when they would like go through and like read out people's names, I'd be like, just Nadia, like no need to get into any more than that. And now it's so funny to think about, with all that we know about the importance of food and like how dangerous all these processed foods are for us and things. My incredible mom or my grandmother, my Egyptian grandmother, who would spend a lot of time for us, would like take the time to prepare these amazing meals for me to take to school, and as you know, because of your background, it's like very rich in like different spices and all of these things. So I would have this amazingly deliciously prepared food that I'm so lucky to have had my family take the time to prepare for me. But then I would get to school and like open it, and all I would want was like the
A
plastic
sandwich.
Lunchable with like
Yeah.
fake cheese and like cardboard crackers. And so it's just like I didn't want anything that would draw attention to me, but there were like so many things about me that just did that naturally.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I can relate to you on several levels there. I think I wanted to change my name to John, in kindergarten,
Hmm.
just because there were a lot of Johns in my class at the time. And so I totally understand where you're coming from there. And I know that, personally speaking, it never really got easy until after high school for me. And so but while we do have a lot of similarities, there's definitely some uniqueness to yours, just because of the fact that you are talking about two strong cultures from different parts of the world coming together, and that makes it incredibly unique in my opinion, especially because I'm familiar with the Egyptian side of things. I did not grow up Muslim, but I understand that, being exposed to Egypt, I do understand the cultural norms, and the expectations, especially in an Islamic society. And so they vary in different ways. And I don't know if we want to build up to this, but talk to me a little bit about the 9/11 era, and what that was like for you.
Yeah. I mean, so I was 11 at that time. And I feel like, there were the things that I just shared before that made me feel like I wanted to kind of put distance between myself and, like my roots and my culture and whatnot. But at the same time, I had a connection to it, because it's, my makeup and my family. I had experiences, that also led me to have like a warm spot and appreciation for where I come from. And so when 9/11 happened, it was really shocking, I think now I could say, mainly in terms of what I experienced in the changes in like my environment and in the relationships with people, that I engaged with for 10 years prior, because from elementary school you are with the same people every year. And I had a friend who actually lived across the street from me, and I feel like this is the memory that I have that's most vivid to me. After 9/11 happened, he would start to make just like really intense jokes at me that were really hurtful and also super surprising. And, things like, oh, look, my family and I are planning a trip, next week. Like, can you call your uncles and make sure that like they leave like this particular flight alone? And that was where, and it like kind of lends to some of decisions that I took later in life. But I think as a child, even though I couldn't fully comprehend what was going on, I was hurt. It made me like reject kind of my roots even more. And it also just left me feeling really confused, because I could understand that there was this really big and impactful event that happened, but I couldn't really understand why it felt so personal, like why I was being kind of like attacked personally for what happened.
Talk to me about, like, this isn't talked about enough. Like, we obviously see the plight a lot of people who dealt with backlash post 9/11. In Break Barriers, I talk about how, I got into my first fight in high school, because someone compared my dad to Osama bin Laden. Again, completely ignorant, given the fact that, we weren't even Muslim, and my dad wore a big cross because he was a priest. But it didn't make any sense, and I remember that was the first time I got into a fight. But one of the things that's not talked about is how parents of children handled it. So tell us a little bit about how, your dad, equipped you to respond, and what was, um, the thought process there, and maybe things you liked that he told you, things that you didn't like, and perhaps other people in your community, and how they potentially were dealing with it.
You know, as you're asking me the question, the thing that's coming to my mind is something that I feel is a characteristic of my parents' generation and maybe yours as well, where a lot of difficult things are not necessarily always talked about. And so I honestly don't remember like sitting down and having conversations where my dad or my mom were talking to me about what was happening, or like helping me to understand why people were having the reactions that they were happening or that they were having, or really like giving me any tools to navigate that with. And like I said, I feel like that is just indicative of the generation. I feel like there is this tendency to, and also there are things that I understand too. My dad is a really positive person. Like my dad doesn't like to get bogged down in the negative. He doesn't really put his energy there. He's always just like, it's okay, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's something that he says all the time, which is great. Like I think it's beneficial to a certain degree to learn to have that mental capacity to not really let challenging things have too much of an effect on you. But at the same time, I think it is really important to be able to have direct and clear conversations about things that are challenging, which we didn't really do.
It's interesting, now you bring it up, same, like, even despite my own experience, like, there was never really a conversation had, and to your point, it was a different time when they grew up, especially, I'll compare your dad with my parents who also grew up in Egypt. You know, they were exposed to a lot growing up, right? They lived through war, they lived through lots of discrimination regardless of what side you were on. They lived through government oppression. It was common. And also, like, if you go to Egypt, one of the things that's wildly evident is the disparity between the wealthy and the non-wealthy. It's so clear. And so, you're right. I mean, there is that element of it, and it is one of the things that I'm curious about, right? Because regardless of if you were Muslim or if you were Sikh or if you were of some other background with Middle Eastern roots, chances are in a post 9/11 world, you had to deal with some sort of backlash there. And I am very curious around how some of the adults at that time had essentially tried to mentor their children in terms of there was no recipe for it. It hadn't happened before. I guess in other ways it has, but not like that. Especially at a time where the internet was building up and there was no hiding. There was no hiding your identity.
Yeah. And yeah, you make me really think about something that I actually don't really think I ever thought about before, but it's like, what was that experience like for them? I mean, my dad, I never heard from my dad about anything that he experienced directly. The only thing that I know, and again, I don't know how anyone felt about it, but I remember that they found out that the local mosque, it was, I don't know what the word is. It was like, they found out that there was some sort of like spying happening. I don't know whether it was like someone that was going there or whether like they found out that there was some sort of like equipment that was in place to kind of be able to monitor what was happening during the
Yeah.
services. But wow, that's so intense, like I imagine how that made them feel, like a group of people who are just like devout to their religion and going to practice and then finding out that they're being spied on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. Um, and one of the things that I think about now, now that we are 20 something years later is, did we learn from that? Like, do you think we learned from that as a society? Like, do you think that if something similar happened again, that we'd behave the same exact way?
I mean, I would love to say that we wouldn't, but I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think that just like a fundamental characteristic of like the human psyche is to fear the other, And I think that I mean, now we're like more interconnected than ever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's cross cultural understanding or, acceptance or anything like that, or that we're like as a society, like really able to put ourselves in other people's shoes and imagine what it's like and to be able to have compassion or understanding for them. I mean, look at what's happening in that part of the world right now and like what a lack of compassion there is for what's happening to human beings that are no different than us, but because they're different in terms of maybe like skin color, culture, ethnicity, religion, it's kind of easy not to feel and have empathy, for another human being.
One of the things that I'm thinking about as we're having this conversation is just the natural the natural escape that we've seen amongst our generation from religion in general, regardless of what religion it is, right? There are people who hold on to their faith and maybe don't talk about it. But the idea of outward displays of religion, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, doesn't really matter now. In our age, we are starting to see a lot of people just kind of take a step back, um, from outwardly identifying, the way that perhaps our parents' generation did a little bit more so. Um, and it's interesting to kind of think about it and to kind of think about the direction that we're going in from that. And it's funny because I do think that there's like a constant friction there. even within our own country, right? Like when we start to see ourselves move too far away from religion, you start to see people say, okay, we need to pull back in. And when you start to see people pull back in, it's like, no, 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 we need to we need to separate. And I feel like when you think about experiences like that, and I'll even speak to my own experience around that, it really does propel you forward to want to know who the real person is inside you, right? Not the person that, you know, in your case, maybe your father wanted you to be culturally. And in my case, like the expectations of people around me when they knew who my parents were. And it's it's always really, really fascinating for me. And I wonder if like everybody goes through this or if it's people who come from strong cultures who feel it a little bit more.
Hmm.
And and I wonder if you've ever given that any thought, especially, because now we're going to go into where your journey took you. But when you think about, the crossroads of like when you finally started to kind of say, okay, like I need to know who Nadia is and I need to like really pin down the identity and what my core values are, what my beliefs are, what it is that I want out of this life. I have a feeling that getting to that point was the result of a lot of lived experience, similar to what we've talked up to this point.
Yeah, I love this question. I love this question because, again, like I was saying before, I feel like it's such a universal experience, but everyone's looks, and feels in the way that is unique to them. And so I would say that basically up until college, I think for so many people, it's like you have all of those years of your life mapped out for you. And I'll just speak for myself personally, right? For my parents, my mom in particular, education was the most important thing to her. And so, yeah, go to elementary school, junior high, high school, and then college. And then that's kind of like the first time where I feel like you're you have the ability to kind of decide where you're going to take your life. And so up until then, I was very much trying to do everything that I understood I needed to do to not only be like a productive and acceptable member of society, but also to make my parents happy and proud. And I think that for them, especially like the immigrant experience, I think security is really important. I think a lot of times people leave the countries where they're from in search of better opportunities. And so, like, for them, it's all about like working and generating financial security. I think it always comes down to security, and security is really tied to money, like in a lot of people's minds. And so, getting a good education so that you can get a good job and secure your future is really important. And so, I tried to do just that. Like, that was my intention. And it was interesting because in college, I decided to study international affairs directly because of my experience growing up as an Arab American and what I felt was that lack of understanding that I shared with you that just led to so much hostility towards Arabs and towards Muslims. So, in my simple mind, I was like, I'm going to study international affairs. I'm going to be a diplomat and I want to be a part of the initiative or, the process that there is to bridge, like two cultures and two parts of the world that are important to me. Like, that's the way that I can do my part. And so I studied that and I tried to get into that, but I realized it wasn't for me. Like, I was able to work for a couple of months at the United Nations, but then once I was there and like with my own eyes and ears kind of like experienced what the reality was of that organization, I realized that it's definitely not the idealistic kind of institution that I thought it was. And so I was like, okay, this is not really going to be my path. I don't know what is. I would say that I was a little bit lost for a couple of years. And I ended up in tech. I ended up in tech in New York City. And the first few years, I really enjoyed. I was learning a lot. It was really exciting, the culture, working with a lot of really young, smart people to really build something from the ground up. And I got in and I kind of rose through the ranks quickly. I had a lot of responsibility. Like I I went from like the most junior to like director level position in 5 years. So I was really checking off all of the boxes that I understood or that I felt were important for me to check off, and living in New York, working in New York, like earning what people would consider like a good salary. So it's like, okay, I'm like living up to the ideals that my parents wanted me to have. I feel like I'm comparable with my peers and doing well if I want to compare myself to the people around me whose opinions I care about. But when I like really checked in with myself, I was like, I don't feel good. The word that I use always is unfulfilled. I felt really unfulfilled and I really could not understand what more I could possibly do to feel satisfied because on paper I checked off all the boxes. So that was where my real kind of soul searching started because I was like, I don't know, I'm 27 years old. Like, if I'm feeling this way now, if I just continue doing what I'm doing, how am I actually going to feel when I'm 50? Or I don't want to wait until I'm 50 and I retire so that I can start figuring out what I actually like to do to make myself happy.
Hey all, it's me, Bishoy. As a marathon runner and endurance athlete, I've come to understand the importance of properly fueling your body for preparation and recovery. Every day, you get a shot at success. How you start your day typically paints a picture of what the rest of the day will look like. Start your day with a super convenient, healthy, and delicious nutritional win. Meal 1 by Creatures of Habit. Overnight oatmeal packed with 30 grams of plant-based protein, chia, flax, and pumpkin seeds. Vitamin D3, omega-3s, a probiotic, and digestive enzymes made in under 1 minute. Stop wasting time or worrying about what to eat as your first meal of the day. Start with meal 1. Visit creaturesofhabit.com, creatures spelled with a K, and use code MILE40 for 15% off a one-time purchase or the first subscription order payment. What was your relationship status, throughout those years? And, how were you in terms of holding down relationships?
I was so like for my New York years, I was like single all that time. And I was really adamant about maintaining that because, like, right after I graduated college, I was in a relationship that I would say it was like the most toxic relationship that anyone could possibly imagine. That I am also so grateful for because that also kind of got me started on a different type of questioning, kind of like inner seeking, which was when I was feeling and experiencing everything that was happening, I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm unique in this sense where like I kind of like put it on me. I don't really put it on the other person. It's not like, oh, you're a really bad person. I'm just great. I was more so just like, I'm curious about what it is about me that has attracted and like put myself in this situation because this is really terrible and I definitely don't want to continue like with these types of experiences for more time of
Right.
my life. And so I took like a real hard intentional pause from that and I was to myself saying I'm going to figure out what's going on here before I even think about anything else.
I always like if you're a guy that made a girl come out of a relationship thinking that, then I just wonder like how life has carried on for you at that point. Like if a girl comes out of a relationship needing to reevaluate everything, that says a lot about you as the guy. So that's funny. Um, no, that made me laugh. The reason I asked the question was because when you're in that era, especially in a big city like New York, and everyone's going through the grind, with regards to their careers and trying to make a living and trying to not only obviously live sustainably, but you can't help but compete in a city like New York. Um, so that idea or that bridge of okay, I don't really feel fulfilled for a lot of people, they can then lean on to, okay, but maybe that's because I haven't been focusing on my love life or I haven't been focusing on
Mhm,
relationships. And here I am just trying to, make money and live this life, but I'm not really giving anything to anyone else.
mhm,
What I've learned over the course of my life and the experiences that I had, and I had a similar experience when I was in banking around this moment of like, there's absolutely no fulfillment in this, was that um, it's not about you. At the end of the day, like you're never going to seek fulfillment by just filling personal voids. Where you're going to find fulfillment, uh, while it differs for everybody, is when you when you learn to give of yourself and open for, receiving. Um, and I know that's kind of vague, but it was kind of like what I've learned over the course of time. So let's go back there now. Okay, so now you're at this crossroads. Where do we go from here?
So the question that you've asked me about relationships and like the piece that I talked about, the fulfillment, I feel kind of go hand in hand. They kind of converge to me starting down this path of self exploration and discovery. And for me, from pretty early on, I mean, at first I started with some sort of like energy techniques that started to get me one to just understand that I'm not just the thoughts that I have in my mind. The thing that I always say is that we are an iceberg, and the only thing that we like experience or like quote unquote know is the very tip. But there's a whole part of the iceberg that's under the surface, which is our subconscious. And that's where the majority of everything lies that's actually really worthwhile. And so I started to kind of begin to learn about that, understand that, and start to explore that within myself. And then pretty early on, I found the world of plant medicine. And so that for me is what really like blew the door open for me in terms of understanding myself, why I thought the way that I did, why I felt the way that I did, and really seeing how I was shaped by all of the events and experiences that I had over my life, and even being able to go back and remember events and experiences that happened in my life that in my day to day, I really was not conscious of or aware about. And really, that's what happens when we have painful experiences. You know, a lot of times those get buried really, really deep into our subconscious, but they are like wounds that are unhealed that really fester below the surface and can result and have like a really massive impact on all aspects of ourselves, mentally, emotionally, and physically, if we don't tend to them. And so I started doing that work, you know, like going back to see what I needed to see, feel, to start to heal so that I could understand and move forward. But also working with plant medicines, it was just like shining a bright light on my inner world and giving me real clarity and understanding of what of my purpose, you know, like what I was born to do in this life, which really early on I understood was to be a healer and like really like to be in service to plants and traditions that really guide us on exactly this path of healing, this path of reconnecting to our purpose, our essence, so that we could do what really we're all here to do in this world, which is to share our unique gifts with it.
When for educational purposes, when you say plant medicines, can you educate our audience on what you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I refer to master plants, sacred plants. So these are plants, some people consider them like entheogens. I do not consider them psychedelics at all. I consider them sacred plant medicines because they're plants that are the vehicles for us to commune with sacred spirits that open our minds and our connection up to a world that exists that we are a part of, but we can't see and we can't connect to in our rational state of mind. And so these plants serve as like a bridge to that other dimension, if you want to consider it that way. And so in particular, like when I talk about plant medicines or sacred plants, I'm talking about plants like ayahuasca, you know, and another sacred plant that I work with is called yopo. So these are, for me, they're not just sacred plant medicines, but they're master teachers. And that's why they're called master plants.
Who introduced you into this world?
I stumbled upon it. I was on a yoga retreat in Guatemala, and one day, one of the facilitators on the retreat very vaguely mentioned to the group during breakfast that if there was anyone that was interested in plant medicines, there was going to be a little group to talk about it 2 days from then. And I really like to like honor and give credit to and also like shout out the importance of your intuition and listening to your intuition, because there is just this feeling inside of me like I heard that, oh, if you're interested in plant medicines, come on Thursday morning after breakfast. We're going to talk about it. And my intuition said, yes, I want to do this. So I went Thursday morning after breakfast. I sat, I listened to what they had to say. I didn't ask any questions at all. I was just feeling what was happening inside of me. And the whole time it was just like, yes, yes, yes. So Thursday, they talk about it. I don't even remember what they said other than the ceremony was going to be Saturday night, the price of it. I went to that ceremony. It turned out they didn't even tell us what the medicine was going to be, or they did, and I don't even remember. And like I said, I didn't ask. It was ayahuasca. And so I ended up at an ayahuasca ceremony, and it was a small group, beautiful facilitators. And again, the facilitators actually did something which is not really common now that I have the experience that I have, but they basically asked everyone how big of a dose they wanted. You had a small, medium, or large option. And I went up to the facilitator and I was like, give me your largest dose, which he did. And I had a really beautiful experience. For me, it felt like I had really dirty, foggy glasses on, and the experience was one of just wiping those glasses clean. And it was like I saw for the first time things that were really important for me to see about myself. I felt like I connected to a sense of joy that I had never experienced before, which made me realize how seriously I took life, how hard and serious I was on myself. And so, if you could imagine how hard I was on myself, that reflected outwards too. I was really hard and judgmental towards others. I just had this really serious and hard approach towards life and towards myself. And I realized that that wasn't necessary and that it was possible for me to experience joy and playfulness like in every moment of my life. And for me, that was like a real eye opener. It was like, wow, a different way is possible. I mean, I wasn't even aware that I was that hard and serious on myself. So that's kind of the beauty of these master teachers. Sometimes it's really just holding up a mirror in front of you for you to see and feel things that you just can't in your day to day. So I ended up having this life changing experience, and it was totally just serendipitous. It wasn't planned. I just happened upon it.
So many questions I want to ask you, and and maybe you tell me if we need to push some of these questions for later. One question that I want to ask, and maybe this question is going to be for later, is when you think about again your roots and you think about your parents coming from the cultures that they came from. Clearly, you took an unconventional route, and so tell me, does it make more sense to visit this question later as to how that has impacted you? And or the other question I have, and I've never been in this situation where like my eye is all over the place, but it's because of I think this is so positively fascinating. When you think about the term medicine, right? And you think about plant medicine, people take medicine generally when they're sick, right?
Hmm.
And medicine is not like it's not a way of life, but when I speak to you and I hear about your experience, you know, you essentially changed your life as a result of your exposure to this medicine.
Hmm.
And so, talk to us a little bit about maybe that, and then we'll go back to your parents' question after.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think you make me think of a question that my mom has asked me before. Or at least on one occasion, she has said to me, like, literally, what could you possibly identify in your life that you have to heal from? Like you had such a good life. We did everything to give you the best life possible, and you need healing. And the thing is that we all do, like a lot of people consider like the top like 1%, that's related to, the amount of money that you have. And for me, like the 1% is like maybe like the few people that exist in the world that don't have like something to heal from. And I think that that is really, really rare because, from the ages of 0 to 7, before we have the ability to be able to think analytically, it's like if you were out at the store with your mom and you asked for an ice cream cone and she said no to you, that no, that feeling of rejection without being able to understand why, that generates a wound inside of you. Like, that's a trauma. People get really like scared about the word trauma and are really quick to be like, no, we don't have any traumas. But the thing is that we all do. And so, like, in a way, we could say without being dramatic, we all have a level of sickness, because there are so many things that are in that subconscious that I talked about before that we are not aware about, because first we have our own life experiences, and then you add into the mix like what we inherit like from our ancestors. There's like the stuff that's passed down from generation to generation. And so like anyone that thinks that they don't have something is really just like lying to themselves about it. And so for me, I mean, like I said in my story, and like you said too, it's not like, I'm sure that there have been people on here before who have had like really intense and like massively like difficult things that they've gone through. And, maybe mine is not so much like that, but like I just said, we all have our experiences that impact us, that hurt us, and that we have to heal from. And so for me, the thing that was most impactful of like starting to work with these medicines, I mean, yes, it took me to show me patterns that I had developed. I mean, a big thing for me was that I wanted to change behavioral patterns that I had. But in order to be able to change those patterns, I had to be able to go back to and understand like the root of where those patterns were formed. And so that was one thing that plant medicines were like wildly like supportive in allowing me to be able to do, like literally to rewire my brain. And then the other thing, which for me I consider really healing, is like being able to find myself, like being able to get to the point where I say, like, I know who I am. Like, I know why I was born. I know what my purpose is in this world. And for me, I think that that's something that, especially now, like so many people are searching for. And that for me, like finding out my purpose, my why, was the most healing and fulfilling thing that I'd ever experienced.
Wow. I mean, that is super eye-opening and something for us to all kind of, take a step back and think about because um when I think about some of the themes across the show around when people kind of get to that moment of finding that purpose, it's usually in the midst of like a really dark era. And it sounds like while things may have not been going the direction that you wanted them to go in just because you couldn't necessarily seek out, your purpose or you couldn't find that fulfillment, you were more so actively in search of it. Whereas a lot of people um, sometimes stumble upon it in uncomfortable situations, myself included.
Hmm.
And so that's definitely, really something cool to think about as we kind of listen to you and kind of hear from your experience. Um, I want to make sure that I don't overlook this. So now that we have all this information, is there anything that you want to share about what it is that you're doing today now that you've been a couple years into this journey?
Yeah, so the reason why I moved to Ecuador, so I quit my job. I quit my job when I got to the point where I felt like I only had a little sliver of time and energy to dedicate to this seeking, and the majority of it was consumed by my work and then distracting myself from my work and my stress and my anxiety. And I wanted to have the majority of my time dedicated to my seeking. So I decided to quit my job. And after a course of events, I moved to Ecuador. And once I moved to Ecuador, things happened really quickly for me. I moved down to Ecuador with the intention to find a way to learn how to move towards this path of being a person who's in service to sacred plant medicines into ancient ancestral healing traditions. And I met my teachers right away. I met the woman who is my family and my teacher on the path in service to ayahuasca. And so together, she and I facilitate ayahuasca retreats and ayahuasca ceremonies, something that we do that I feel like is really unique. We work a lot with private retreats, private ceremonies. And my teacher is not only a shaman, but she's also a therapist. And she has this like a really amazing blend of mix, like using the space where one is in a space of expanded consciousness with the sacred medicine of ayahuasca, and then to be able to weave in therapeutic tools and modalities to basically be able to help someone maximize the experience of being in that state. I feel like what transpires in that space could be equivalent to maybe like 10 or 20 years of therapy in the span of like 8 or 10 hours. And so I'm in service to ayahuasca, and that's the way in which I am through these ceremonies and retreats. And then I'm also the student of an indigenous elder from Colombia. Like to use the term traditional medic, but also it's like interchangeable with the word shaman. And I use the word traditional medic because for me, like, it's really about healing. And that's the way I feel I like to convey my understanding of that word. He heals. The healing tradition that he has shared with me is one of healing. It's one of being able to go to the root of whatever it is that is ailing a person, whether it's mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical, and it gets cured and the person is healed, like, and can move on. It's not about putting a band-aid solution onto things. And so I met him a month after I moved to Ecuador. I met Mercedes right as soon as I got to Ecuador. And so I have my work with Mercedes, and then I have the work that I do independently as a healer in this tradition. My teacher from Colombia, his name is Abuelo Clemente, and he's Sikwani. Sikwani means people that live with nature, like people that care for nature. And so they have a healing tradition that he has preserved, which he has shared with me. And so I work in that way with people as well. And that's, if we want to, compare it to something, it's literally like going to a doctor and being like, I have this, this, and this. But instead of like prescribing you like a medicine or a band-aid, it's like your thing gets healed.
Wow. Um, you just made me think of something. Like, do you ever, do you ever, you obviously know what's going on in the world or outside of you, right? And you've kind of taken this path, and it's so eye-opening to hear you just talk about it and what it has brought to you, and how it has completely reshaped your life. Do you ever look at, people who are living your past life, and think, I either miss it a little bit, or I miss elements of it a little bit, or did I make the right choice? I don't hear any of that in your answer. In your answer, I just hear like, I'm only looking forward. This is for me. This is my life. This makes me happy. I can't even, imagine, uh, looking back from where I am right now. 'Cause I don't hear any of that in your voice.
Yeah, I don't. Honestly, like, I really don't. And I feel like getting to where I am today has given me such strong faith. It's actually really interesting. If we had more time, I feel like this is a
Tell
whole
me.
tangent that we could go off on. But my experience has connected me so much to my faith in God. And it doesn't look like the way that the religion that I was brought in prescribed, but it is what it is in my way. And I have such a strong faith in God and the universe. And what I feel like I've learned from my personal experience is that when we are able to able to connect and open ourselves and let go of our control or of our wanting things to be a certain way and allow things to unfold as they're meant to, the most beautiful things happen. And so I'm like fully surrendered to that way of living. And so for me, a lot about it too is about not being attached to things. And I have amazing memories from my previous life. I was actually, don't know why, last night thinking about some of the years that I had in New York. I had amazing friends I'm so grateful for. You mentioned that thing about like sometimes people can then like go into a relationship or something like that to try and find fulfillment. I had so much fun with the friends that I had in New York, and we had amazing times. And there are people from that phase in my life that are still a part of my life. And then there are people that aren't. And that makes sense, because I mean, there are aspects of me that are the same, that have always been, but really I'm a different person. And so maybe the things that used to bring me and other people together, things that we had to relate to, just don't exist anymore. And so it's kind of natural for some relationships to just fade away. And I'm grateful for them for the part that they played in my life. But I'm also okay with that. I'm okay with growing past like situations, people, places that are just no longer in alignment with who I am and who I'm continuing to become, and where I'm going. And I think that that's just a really natural kind of experience and aspect of life, that sometimes people have a hard time with, but it's for me, it's pretty natural and it's okay.
Do you have any regrets, not about your decision to go in this direction, but do you have any regrets looking back on your previous life around some of the decisions you had made when you, I mean, we all look, I look back at some of the things that I did when I was younger and I'm like, Wish I didn't do that," or "I wish I didn't go down that path," or like, "I wish I didn't make those decisions." Do you have any regrets that, you reflect on that maybe would have gotten you here quicker? Or do you believe that, what's meant to be was meant to be, and the timing was right?
I think that I don't know, I kind of feel like everything that happened, even it's like the worst stuff that I've lived or experienced, I think had to happen in order for me to be able to get to where I am today. And at the same time, I could say, like, as a little girl, I remember like being connected to things that I'm really super connected to today. And I think it's like not so much a regret about actions that I did or didn't take, but I feel what I want to share is like regret more towards the structures of the societies that we, or like the society that we live in. It's like I wish that there were more um things in place that more so supported from a young age, children being able to connect to and foster their talents and their gifts and their connection to themselves, so that from a younger age they start the path to like getting to where they want to go and are meant to like evolve to, as opposed to just like taking them farther and farther away from that. Because I think like as a little girl, like I knew I was always just like outside, like talking to birds and like really interested with like plants and things like that. And it's like, that's basically like what I do today. Just sit outside and talk to birds. And I'm really interested in plants.
I should have asked you this earlier. Do you have any siblings?
I have a younger brother.
And, uh, are you guys similar, different?
We're different. I mean, he is an Aquarius. And so I feel like I really see that element in him. He's like a really innovative thinker, like outside of the box, um, an amazing being. But in terms of like our interests, we're really super different. He's really into tech and he's really into like, I don't know, like internet coins is like what I refer to that stuff, like Bitcoin. And he's always like, cool, like I'm so happy that you're doing like what you are doing. But when I ask him if he's interested in experiencing it, he's just like, I'm good for now. But my brother has always been really, really chill. Like my brother is chill, he goes with the flow. I've never seen my brother raise his voice or get angry at anyone. And so like comparing ourselves, I was really different. Like until I was 27 years old, I was like really high strung, like really intense, like definitely like lost my temper and yelled a lot. And so we have differences, but now I'm chill.
Got it, got it. Well, this brings me back to now that question I was asking you earlier, right? Like, again, you've taken an unconventional path and it works really well for you. But I know as a son of immigrant parents, this is definitely a tough one to explain to them. And with you, you come from two different cultures, both of which are fairly traditional in different ways. And here you are, taking a rather unorthodox route. Was there a struggle there? Is it an ongoing struggle, or were you in a fortunate situation where it was just a matter of dialogue?
You know, I think the biggest sign for me that this was the right path for me was how little friction there was, because I really expected it to be like I was really bracing myself for one of like the biggest conflicts that I thought I was ever going to have to enter into. But I think because before I decided to take this decision to move to Ecuador, I had been working, as I said, with these traditions, with these plants for myself, for my own healing for a few years. And what I believe is that my parents saw the change in me. I feel like they could feel it, the effect that it had on our relationship like in a massively positive way. And so I feel like even though they couldn't really understand it, and even though maybe it scared them a little bit, I feel like that made it kind of like impossible for them to deny that there was something good about it. It was like they really didn't understand it. They wouldn't have expected it or like wanted it, but it was also like there was something inside of them that like really couldn't doubt that this was probably something that was really good for me. And so they were kind of like, we want you to be happy. If like this is going to make you happy, cool, go for it. But that doesn't mean that like in between there haven't been moments of friction and conflict and stuff, because obviously it is really different and it's not possible for them fully to wrap their heads around it. You know, like as I mentioned, my dad, the religion is really important. So we've had conversations where he's literally like, are you worshiping the devil? And I'm like, I promise this is not devil worship, but like I understand why you would think that, because also like there's a certain level of manipulation in religions, and like anything that's not by the book is devil worship. And so like I get it. But don't worry, I'm not worshiping the devil, you know? And my mom is like, listen, like good for you, I believe in God. And I'm like, thanks, I believe in God too. You know, like there is like a huge gap in terms of their ability to understand. Regardless, they support me.
Got it. Got it. No, that thank you for sharing that, and thank you for letting us in. I mean, um, there are a lot of people who would have hesitated to power through, toward um, your current state of happiness, because of their hesitation around what that conflict may have looked like, because of their fear of the friction, or their inability to face the friction head on or to navigate through it. And so, kudos to you, because I think in a way you're a trailblazer. And I think that's really, really special. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm really proud to have you on the podcast, is because, um, again, I want people to see your lived experience, and to understand that, there is a path forward, especially, the thing is, like we had kind of alluded to earlier, not everyone's story is the same, right? And some traumatic experiences are more defined, and based on society standards, maybe some traumatic experiences are considered to be a lot more extreme. But one of the things that's consistent with a lot of people who've been on the show and a lot of people who listen to this show is that period of trying to find fulfillment, trying to understand what fulfillment means, trying to understand what their purpose is. Why are we even here? Are we just chasing the money? Are we just chasing, what society tells us that we need? Or is there something deeper? Is there a bigger calling for us? Is there a bigger reason for us to be here? And so I think that's what your story does a really good job of helping the listeners navigate. And as we round things out now, I think I just want to ask you, if you think about your experience and how you've navigated the last several years, and how you've made the decision to commit to this. Um, Talk to me a little bit about just your overall life's philosophy going forward. And I know this is kind of a broad question, so let me try to nail in on it a little bit more. When you think about your mantra, or if you think about, the core values that remain, as you navigate life going forward, what would you tell the audience is your focal guiding point internally for how you navigate, life and what's thrown at you going forward?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like we can be whoever we want to be in this world, and we can create literally anything that we want to create. And I feel like that's so important to understand, because I feel like a lot of times the belief is that life is just happening to us, but really we're creating our reality, is what I believe, you know? And that's why this path of exploration, self exploration, and healing is so important to me, because in the reality and that I live in, I'm aware that my thoughts create my reality. And so for me, it's like my hygiene, like my mental hygiene is super important. Like it's something that I have to be like really, really um on top of, because that's my belief, that's my philosophy. And so like I have to make sure that I'm cleaning, the things that result in the thoughts that I'm projecting out into the world. And I have, like I said before, like this full trust in the universe. It's really like that cliche thing that you hear. It's like leap and the net will appear, and it's really that way. It's not like the security is going to appear in order for you to be able to make the difficult decision or like go down the path less traveled. It's like you have to do that first. But I feel like time and time again, I've been shown that when you do that, it's like the net really appears, or the path that you discovered is honestly so much more beautiful than anything you could have ever imagined. And so it's like the only thing that you have to do, which is not to say that it's easy, but it's like to get yourself to the point where you decide to take that path. And I think like we all always have a sense of like where our heart or like our intuition is wanting us to go. But a lot of time it's the fear that keeps us from following it. But it's just like follow it, because literally like the thing that's waiting for you is like the most beautiful life that you could have ever imagined for yourself. So why would you not do it?
Beautifully said, Nadia. Wow, what a way to close us off. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, for your vulnerability, for being your authentic self, and for really letting us in and how you've navigated life's journey and inspiring us all, and helping us to understand that we can create our lives, and we can take charge of the wheel. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.